So on the morning of 9/11, I was home getting ready to go to work. I was the managing editor of the Clarion Ledger, Mississippi's largest newspaper at the time. And I received a call from our chief photographer, and he asked me, he said, "Are you sitting down?" I said, "No, I'm getting ready for work." He says, "Are you watching television?" And I said, "No, I'm getting ready for work." He said, I suggest you turn the television on." And as soon as I turned the television on, I saw the first plane crash into the Tower 1. And I'm thinking, okay, this had to be an aviation accident of unprecedented levels. We probably had never seen anything like that before. And so I dismissed it as just something that was just going to be a really bad accident for New York. But then shortly after that, I decided to just stay home and just watch. And then I saw the second plane crash into the second tower. And at that point, the bells went off, and I said, "Oh my God, we're under attack." And so I knew then that my world had changed and our world had changed. So I went to work that day knowing that there were going to be many, many long days to try to figure out exactly what this was all about, this act of terrorism. And I can remember putting out an extra edition that day that sold out in minutes because people were clamoring for information, any information they could get about that story. And to wrap this up, I'll just say this. Ever since that day, my life has changed. I fly a lot. When I fly and I take my shoes off at the TSA point, and when they search my briefcase, I'm always thinking of 9/11. When I fly to Washington, D.C. and I fly over the Pentagon, I think of 9/11. When I go and visit the financial district where the 9/11 memorial sits, I think of 9/11. And when I visit the museum, and one of the most powerful aspects of the museum is this wall with all 2,500 people who died that day. And if you're not moved by that, if you're not touched by going in that room and you see pictures of every single person who died that day, then you're not a human being. And I can just tell you that 9/11 has never been far from me. 20 years ago, it feels like yesterday. Because, it'll always be with us. We'll always be on guard for terrorism as a country. And I will always be appreciative of the heroes that day who went into those towers and saved as many lives as they can. And I'll also be very proud of the brave people of New York who built the city back, who were on the front lines of just saying, we will not be defeated by this enemy. So 9/11 is very, very real to me as a former newspaper editor and as a person who actually lives it every single day in some way or another. There's so many more memories, but I think I'll just leave it at that. It's a very emotional time for me, very emotional that this day is coming. 20 years, it feels like 20 minutes.
I'm Felicia Davis, Manager of Early Education and Education Enrichment here at MPB. My memory of 9/11, DeKalb County Schools, Bethune Middle School, 6th grade language arts teacher. It was a cloudy, overcast day, and it was an auspicious day, and I just remember knowing something was going on, but not quite understanding what. A fellow teacher of mine who's a friend, her husband was in the Army, and she says, "Something's wrong." And I was like, "What do you mean something's wrong?" She says, "Something is going on. I don't know if it's war, I don't know whatever it is, but there's something," because somehow her husband had messaged her. And the message comes on the intercom from the principal saying, "Teachers, do not turn on your televisions. Do not turn on your televisions because whatever it is that's going on, we would prefer parents discuss it with the children." But of course, being teachers, several of the teachers did turn on their televisions. And so I never got the full understanding of what was going on still because I didn't turn on my television. I didn't want a kid to be traumatized or to be hurt by something that I did, especially after I had received direction not to do it. So I remember getting in the car and turning on my radio. And I turned on the radio and there was much talk about what was going on in the world. And I was like, oh my God, oh my God, this is horrible. So I rushed home and I turned on the television. And when I turn on the television, I don't understand. I see it, and I watch the planes hit the buildings. But I'm like, is this real? It's like not registering in my brain that this is something that's for real. It happened today, and there are people who are dead. And so I just remember specifically the people running down the street and being covered with dust, like a ball of dust that followed the people down the street. Never understanding that somebody in my family had been directly affected. And so it was a couple of days later, my cousin, Margaret Elaine, she was 51, I believe. She was a second cousin, my grandfather's brother's child. And my grandfather and my uncle were super duper close, being from Mississippi. I always called every single weekend. And she was one of 5 girls. And so we got the message that, she was in the tower. We didn't know like it was the first or the second tower. And so we heard that she was in the tower, and we don't know if she's alive. We don't know anything now. And so my Aunt Katie, her mother, and her sister went. They went to New York to see if they could find anything, to find out if she was alive, if she had been recovered. They visited the tents. There were lots of papers posted everywhere on, with people's names to say, hey, they may be located here or there, or have you seen this person? And the efforts were no good because she was not alive. And so it was devastating. It was devastating because our families are close. And many months later, and many anniversaries later, nothing's been recovered of Margaret. There have been several news stories in Detroit. She was a Detroit native. She'd actually moved to New York to pursue acting. And it was at a late age. She was one of 5 girls. My Uncle Jesse only had girls, which was so interesting. And he loved those girls. And she'd gone there to pursue acting and had taken many temp and part-time jobs. She was in the North Tower. So she's gone, and I, as a teacher many years later, I would share with students the tragedy of 9/11, and I would let them watch the newscast, and so they would try to comfort me, and they would say, Miss Davis, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that it happened, and I'm sorry too. And my aunt is now gone, but when I watched the video some years later as an anniversary, and she discussed her feelings of when she realized that her child was in that building, she was like, Jesus. She called out. She said, Jesus, that's where Margaret is. And she said she just hoped that she imagined. Her hope was that Margaret had called out to Jesus too, and she believed she had, and she believed that Jesus said, come on. And so I just take comfort in that, and I take comfort in the fact that I know that so many people loved her.
Hi, I'm Kevin Farrell, the Assistant Director of Radio at MPB, and on September 11, 2001, I was working at MPB. Before I went into work, I was chatting with a friend of mine who lived in England, and he made some sort of reference to a plane, crashing into the side of a building, and I thought, that's very strange. I don't know what he's talking about. He must have his story jumbled up or whatever. Well, when I got to work, I stopped by my friend's office who had a TV on, and we were talking about it when actually the second plane hit the building. And so we were all just completely dumbfounded. And I remember for the rest of the day, all of the TVs at MPB were turned into the coverage, and people were just stunned. We didn't know really how to react or what it was all about. Another concern that I personally had was that my brother lives and has lived in Brooklyn for a long time, and so was certainly concerned about him. Later found out that he was doing well and was not affected by it. But I think one of the other things that really stuck with me kind of in the days following the attack was I think they had set up a thing where you could put a note, I'm looking for somebody or that sort of thing. And to me, that was one of the saddest things, was that these people had lost loved ones, and they didn't know, had they been killed in the bombing or in the plane crashing into the buildings, were they just missing or whatever. that was something, like I said, that really affected me, and you could sympathize with those people to not know, what had happened to their loved ones. And I think, another kind of lasting effect is just that we've gotten used to it now, but, the major change in the way airport security was handled. I know back when I was a little kid, you pretty much kind of walked through, the gate. There was no kind of major security going on, and now, of course, we have TSA and screenings and that sort of thing. And so I think we can feel a little bit more comfortable when we go flying, but that was certainly a major change after 9/11.
My name is Beth Ann Wan. I'm the Human Resources Director at MPB, and I remember 9/11. I had graduated college, but I was still living in Hattiesburg, and at the time I had stayed in Jackson overnight, and a friend of mine texted me, I was still asleep, and told me what was happening. So I had a shift to work at Chesterfield's restaurant in Hattiesburg, and drove back, worked my shift, and then pretty much stayed glued to the TV for the next week. I remember it being a very emotional time. It's one of those things that obviously you'll never forget. Since then, I've been to New York several times because my sister lives there, and a few years ago was able to go to the 9/11 Museum, and that was also a very, very emotional experience. Much like the Holocaust Museum in DC, you can't get out of there without feeling emotional about it. And I hope that nothing like that ever happens again. I feel like we've learned from it and done the best we can to make sure that it doesn't happen again in the future. And just hope that, it's one of those things that brought everybody together as a country, and it'd kind of be nice if we could have an event not like that, but something to bring the country back together the way everybody felt after 9/11. If there was one positive that came out of that, it's that, I feel like the entire country pulled together and kind of was on the same page.
I was 18 years old, a freshman at Millsaps College. I just moved to Jackson in August, so a month and a half or so in the city. And we were walking, a group of friends and I, to our first big exam for Heritage. And there were whispers already. Some people had, I guess, seen something on TV or maybe read something early in the earlier days of the internet. But we weren't quite sure. We went in and took our exam. And by the time we got out, about 75 minutes later, more information had come out. Both towers had been hit. And as everyone kind of matriculated to their next classes, there was a sense of anxiety and a sense of curiosity, because it was still really unknown what this event was. By the time I got to my 10 o'clock class, the picture became a little clearer. I remember being in that class as we watched the first tower fall, and then the rest of that day was just wrapped up in being glued to the television. And for me, what that day kind of represents was, again, as an 18-year-old that just moved away from home, it was kind of a welcome to adulthood moment. Not being surrounded around my family, that support unit, and having to kind of understand what all this meant on my own with my peers. It certainly, was kind of a coming of age moment. And then it also shrunk the world for me a lot. Understanding how the tentacles of foreign policy and America's role in the rest of the world, how it shapes and leads to an event like September 11th, 2001. And so it almost acts as a bookend or a marker for when I kind of graduated out of adolescence into adulthood. And I still think of that moment as like, the time I began to really ask questions about the world and understand the world on my own. rather than being, being guided.